Within the confines of the Boruto universe, there are multiple ways to attain immense power, such as consuming planets, becoming a cyborg, or even attaining godhood. You also have certain abilities that are considered to be divine in nature, which don't require the usage of Handsigns. These abilities are called Shinjutsu, which was introduced in Boruto's manga. Now I'll be ranking these techniques based on power and also their effectiveness in battle. Keep in mind that this list only contains what is confirmed to be a Shinjutsu, not the ones that might be. So, with that said, let's get into it.
The Rasengan.
First on the list we have the Senrigan. This Shinjutsu belonged to a cyborg named Ada, which she received after being implanted with the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki. This ability allows the projection of one's consciousness to any location to observe any present event, even the ones taking place in a different dimension, as well as any past event up until the moment of their birth. Though there is one limitation, which is that they can't perceive events within a spiritual or mental plane. So while this ability can be useful for information gathering and even strategizing beforehand, it certainly doesn't rank above any of the other abilities on this list.
I can only see current events in real time or pick scenes from the past to watch. For example, right now, let's watch Kawaki and his friends.
Next up, we have Prescience. Now the name Prescience itself is by definition the fact of knowing something in advance, thus having foreknowledge. This means that one who possesses this ability is able to see every possible timeline that can materialize from the actions taken in present time. Now Koji awakened this ability when he was on his deathbed, overwhelmed by Shiki's extraordinary power. This ability belonged to Shibai Otsutsuki himself, which allowed him to see infinite possible futures in the form of strips of film. In this case, they told the story of Baron Mode versus Ishiki, Boruto versus Kawaki, and even Code creating the cloudgrams by shrinking the body of the Tentacles. Now these are things that happened in this timeline, but they also mentioned other possibilities that didn't materialize, such as a timeline in which Naruto dies in a battle versus Ishiki. He then resurrects in Kawaki's body, which leads to the destruction of the planet using his divine tree. There's also a future in which Ishiki is defeated, but Kawaki goes on to kill Boruto and Sarada atop the Akage monument, which leads to Code feeding Kawaki to the Tentacles, thus resulted in the world being destroyed once again. So as opposed to one of the futures he saw that became the current timeline, you also have other timelines that didn't manifest. That's because the future isn't one straight path. Many narratives get snuffed out based on which branch of the crossroad is taken. It's pretty much a battle royale between destinies, so to speak. So in a sense, the futures Koji is able to see aren't an absolute thing, which gives them the opportunity to avoid the worst possible outcome. Now given what I just said, this might seem like it should be way higher on the list, but let me explain why it isn't. You see, in a combat situation, this ability wouldn't be as useful as anything else on this list aside from the Senrigan. That's because it allows one to see infinite possible futures, not the future. So in practice, the person using this ability has no idea which future will come to pass. It's really up to chance. For example, if one future shows the opponent jabbing from the left, the other one shows them jabbing from the right, and the next one shows them using a certain ability. You, as the user of Prescience, have no idea which future will manifest, so either decide to defend against everything, which might not be possible in every instance depending on your capabilities, or you can choose to defend against one of them, which might not come to pass. There's also the fact that the futures you're able to see through Prescience aren't exactly reliable. That's because knowing the future also changes the future, as stated by Koji himself. So once you know a future, you can no longer behave the same as before you knew it. It will instead branch in complex ways, making it even more difficult to predict, to the point of negating the advantage of foreseeing the future. I mean, Koji went as far as saying that to know the future leads to the act of destroying it, so this much is pretty evident. By the way, that is also why Koji still needed to verify that the Tentacles was in Jigen's dimension before having Boruto teleport to that location, because even though he saw it in the future where this was the case, that doesn't mean that it still is the case since he saw it. So if you're not even able to act purely based on what the future shows you in a situation when you have time to think, what makes you believe that this ability would be feasible in active combat while under pressure? Now, I believe a more useful ability would be true precognition, which actually shows the future that is going to happen, not something that might happen. So there wouldn't be any questions about if the opponent will take that option or this option. It's more so about how you choose to react to it. Now, I know some of you guys are probably thinking the Sharingan, but it also doesn't have precog in the truest sense. It does allow one to predict the movements of their opponents, but not by seeing the future. It does instead allow the user to see the slightest twitch in one's muscle fiber, which gives them an idea of what the person is going to do next. So in a sense, this would also be more useful in battle than Prescience itself, but it also isn't the best form of the ability. In any case, Prescience is still a useful ability in certain use cases, but active combat isn't one of them. Next on the list, we have the claw marks. This Shinjutsu belonged to a cyborg named Code, which he received after being implanted with the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki. It's said to be similar to the 4th Hokage's Flying Raijin Jutsu, which allows him to instantly travel from each marked location. Now, as of this video, it doesn't have any limitations on what it can be placed on, so this includes the ground, the tree, skin, and even clothing. It also has the ability to cover wide surface areas and even apply force to the object it's placed on. A prime example of this would be when Code struck the tentacles by literally squeezing it until it started to shed pieces of its own body. There's also a bright side to the ability as well, which is that it can't be absorbed by karma. That is because the marks themselves consist of chakra along with the iron from Code's blood. So since the karma can't absorb physical material not made from chakra, it doesn't have the ability to absorb this specific Shinjutsu.
No, stop! Don't do it! So will you answer my questions then?
Next on the list, we have Sukunahikona. Now this ability stems from the Otsutsuki known as Ishiki, which was later inherited by his vassals Kawaki and Jigen. This in essence allows them to shrink almost anything and restore it almost instantly as well. Now the only exception to this are living things, aside from the user themselves of course. So unlike the restriction to karma which prevents it from absorbing the claw marks, Ishiki's Sukunahikona does have the ability to shrink it, as seen in Kawaki's fight versus Code. This makes the ability extremely overpowered since if one doesn't have some kind of dojutsu which enhances their visual prowess, detecting the user of the ability while in a shrunken state seems impossible. By the way, one of the most dangerous applications of this ability so far would be when it's combined with the usage of rods. As stated by Sasuke in chapter 37, the rods are spawned small enough that you don't even realize that you've been stabbed. They then inflict mortal wounds when instantly restored to their original size. Now I want you guys to understand how broken this ability truly is. The user of the ability can insert them into your body without you knowing because he shrunk them to such a small size. Then he can restore them to their full size while inside of your body. So this ability is literally insta-kill and durability neg if used correctly, since it can also enter the pores of your skin. Now the ability always isn't used in this way since we have seen characters react to them before, such as Boruto, Naruto in both 6-path Sage mode and Borrowed mode, and even Sasuke himself. That is because in those cases, the user restored the rods before they penetrated the person's skin. Now I have no idea why they would intentionally give them more time to react to the ability, but they did. Next on the list, we have Daikokuten or Daikokuten. Either one is fine. Now this ability stems from the Otsutsuki known as Ishiki as well, which was later inherited by his vessel Kawaki. Now this allows the user to store what they've shrunken in a dimension where time doesn't flow, at least according to Ishiki. This was later retconned since Kawaki was also able to send Naruto and Hinata to that timeless dimension without shrinking them, which means that isn't a requirement. And yes, this is obviously a retcon since if being shrunken was never needed, Ishiki wouldn't have said it allows him to store what he shrunk. That wouldn't even be a part of the description. Now the reason why I have this above Sukunahikona despite the overpowered nature of that ability is because it works in more situations. You see, if one has the ability to use this ability, they pretty much have the ability to win any battle. That's because all it would require is them sending that person to the timeless dimension which freezes them in place. This, by the way, doesn't apply to the user of the ability, which means they can finish them off while they can't defend themselves or just leave them stuck in that dimension. The only counter to this ability is absorption, which means you have to be fast enough to react and absorb the vortex before it envelops the target. Now this wouldn't put Sukunahikona above Daikokuten since if you're fast enough you can also dodge that ability as well. Though the upside to this one is that it also works on living things unlike Sukunahikona. So in a scenario where the person you're battling has insane regen or even immortality, Sukunahikona doesn't do much since every damage will be repaired. Though if one possesses Daikokuten, they can still win the fight by sending that person to the timeless dimension.
Just like this glass of wine. Andy.
Next up, we have the Karma Seal. Now this jutsu is absolutely broken in the sense that it pretty much allows the Otsutsuki to attain a form of immortality by constantly resurrecting within a new body. To be more specific, the Karma Seal is stated to be an highly compressed Otsutsuki Baku file. This file slowly extracts over time, and once all of that data is fully extracted, the person who implanted it will be resurrected within that body. So the concept itself is pretty simple. Even so, the Karma Seal goes way beyond that in the sense that it's also capable of converting Otsutsuki data within it to another person's component while still remaining genetically Otsutsuki at its core. That's how Boruto became 100% Otsutsuki while still retaining his own essence. Now, as it relates to combat, the Karma Seal itself also amplifies the user's physical prowess as well as their abilities. This of course is proportional to the power of the Otsutsuki who implanted the seal itself. Though it is important to consider that the amount of power and battle experience you're able to access from the Karma Seal depends on the amount of data that has been extracted. It also appears that the vessel doesn't have access to the full power of the Otsutsuki until the resurrection process has completed. Even so, I still think this ability would be way more valuable than the other abilities mentioned prior. Mind you, this ranking is purely based on how effective these abilities would be in battle, regardless of whatever downside they come with. So given the fact that the Karma Seal provides a significant boost to the power of the user, giving them the ability to absorb chakra-based abilities and even teleport to different locations using space-time Shinjutsu, the ability does provide significant counters to the other abilities I mentioned prior. The main one of course being the ability to absorb chakra-based attacks, which has been shown to be a direct counter to Daikokuten, provided one is fast enough to react to it. Same applies to Sukunahikona as well. One can simply be fast enough and powerful enough to react to and perceive this ability. This edge can be provided by the Karma Seal in both instances, which makes it more valuable in a situational basis. Now, if it is the case that the power the person gets from Karma doesn't trump the power of the person using Daikokuten or Sukunahikona, then of course the opposite of this would be true.
The Rasengan.
Next on the list we have Reflection. You see, this Shinjutsu belonged to a cyborg named Damon, which he also received after being implanted with the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki. This is one of the most overpowered abilities in the entire franchise, and I would say in fiction, because in a sense this ability allows Damon to reflect all attacks if he's touching someone with his palm, and it also allows him to reflect intent, which doesn't need him to be touching anyone. He can reflect intent whether it be murderous or damaging in any way, and as stated by Ada, the stronger the intent to kill, the more powerful the reflection. Listen, someone simply picturing the killing scene inside their head will cause the end result to be instantly reflected upon him or her. We saw this when Kawaki tried thinking about slapping Damon to test his abilities. The slap was reflected onto Kawaki without Damon needing any physical contact. This is similar to how he was able to reflect the guard's intent to cut off his head without needing to touch anyone there as well. Then you have the second ability, which allows him to reflect incoming attacks as long as his palms are touching someone else. This was seen when Kawaki tried to attack Damon back in chapter 74 and also back in chapter 67 as well, when Code brought Damon to the battlefield in the middle of Kawaki's attack, which was also then reflected. There's also the time when Code tried to place his claw marks on Damon that were also then reflected, even though Code had no intent to harm him. So it does seem as if Damon has one ability which reflects someone's direct intent to harm him, and also one that just reflects attacks that can damage him even if the person didn't intend to do so, though that one requires him to be in contact with someone else. Now, there are times when physical attacks are launched at Damon but were not reflected. For example, when Damon first fought Boruto, but Boruto's kick nor his intent to kick Damon was reflected even though he was touching Boruto with his palm. By the way, the reflection ability does still work on the person he's touching if they choose to attack him. This was shown when Code's intent to scratch Damon was reflected, as pointed out by Code himself. So what this likely implies is that Damon is capable of disabling the ability if he chooses to do so, thus being able to fight normally, which is the reason why Boruto's attacks weren't reflected in this instance. By the way, this is backed up by him telling Kawaki to try again and promising that there won't be any more cheap tricks, which led to Kawaki's following attack not being reflected. Now, another thing to point out is that there aren't any existing counters to this ability. Now, some might argue that you might be able to bypass the ability using genjutsu, sealing jutsus, or even by fighting Damon without the intent to harm him. The issue with this assumption is that it just isn't true. Let's use Ada as an example. Her charm ability prevents you from causing her harm. Even if you want to do so, you physically can't, as seen when Code tried to slice her with his claws. Now, what you likely didn't notice is that Code was able to place his claw marks on her body. The reason why this is possible is because the claw mark itself doesn't cause harm. This was explained by Ada when Shikamaru was able to restrict her movements using shadow paralysis. The reason why he was able to do this is because the jutsu itself doesn't directly inflict harm. The same logic applies to the claw mark. Yet as seen in chapter 60, Damon's reflection ability automatically reflected Code's claw mark onto him, which means it doesn't matter whether the ability indirectly or directly causes harm, it will still be reflected. So Genjutsu, sealing technique, shadow paralysis, it doesn't matter. All of them would be reflected regardless. Also, the ability does transfer to the person he's currently touching, which means that any attack directed towards that person will be reflected just the same.
Wow, I like that move. How cool.
That then brings us to Omnipotence. You see, in Boruto chapter 79, Ada's true ability was finally revealed, and the name of that ability is Omnipotence. Momoshiki later explained that Omnipotence is an ultimate power only an all-knowing almighty god can wield. It's a programming language that the gods were said to have used to create worlds. It's a will to make anything real. That is what omnipotence is. So in essence, omnipotence is a reality warping technique that allows the user to bend reality to their will. But there are some key factors we need to address. You see, Ada was first introduced as a character who has a charm ability which basically makes everyone infatuated with her. Well, anyone aside from Otsutsukis and blood relatives. Ada was stated to have received this ability after being implanted with the cells of Shibai Otsutsuki himself. This was somewhat later contradicted by Momoshiki when he said that he has knowledge on every Shinjutsu in existence and Ada's charm ability isn't one of them. This was then later backed up in chapter 79 when it was revealed that Ada's charm ability isn't a Shinjutsu stemming from the Otsutsuki. It is in fact a new ability manifested by Ada using the power of omnipotence. It's then explained that Ada's charm ability is simply a result of Ada's subconscious desires made material by omnipotence, because again, omnipotence is the will to make anything real, and Ada's desire was to be loved. So in using omnipotence, she was able to manifest that desire into a reality, thus making everyone infatuated with her. So in essence, the charm ability isn't an ability by itself. It's just a manifestation of Ada's deepest desire caused by omnipotence. Now, Momoshiki also stated that Ada can't control the ability because she isn't Otsutsuki, which is why this was all done subconsciously. Now, we also saw this ability being used once again in chapter 79, with Ada accidentally manifesting Kawaki's desire to make Boruto an outsider, so it would be easier to get rid of him. As stated by Momoshiki once again, this current phenomenon is Kawaki's desire becoming reality. He went through Ada and invoked omnipotence to cause you and him to switch places. So now Kawaki is the son of the Akage and Boruto is the outsider. Now Momoshiki also later explained that people's memories have been altered. Any common knowledge involving Boruto and Kawaki has been changed. This is possible since every person's consciousness is by nature linked through chakra, so a god could meddle with it if they so choose. Now, the ability does have some limitations since Momoshiki also stated that the ability does not affect the Otsutsuki. It's also confirmed that the ability doesn't affect Sarada and Sumire for some unspecified reason. So, in essence, the ability is able to manifest the subconscious desires of not just the user of the ability, but also others as well. And based on the fact that Code was also affected by the ability while in another dimension, it shows that the scale of the ability is immeasurable and likely affects all of reality. Oh, and by the way, you can't simply tell people the truth and expect omnipotence to be reversed. In fact, it was later revealed that the ability is in continuous effect, so as soon as someone notices a contradiction, the ability overrides it once again and forces them to either forget about it or accept it as is. So in essence, the only way to reverse the effects of omnipotence is to use it again to change reality. So if one is able to use this ability in battle, legit nothing else on this list matters. The user can simply erase his opponent from existence, remove their abilities, create abilities that counters their abilities, or make themselves unkillable. Legit anything you can think of can be done using omnipotence. With that said, guys, that is it for the video. Let me know your thoughts down below. If I missed anything, just, let me know and I'll, make another one, I guess. But also, guys, I've launched the channel membership. So if you guys want to become a part of this community, you guys can join by going to the homepage and hitting the big join button. I would really, really appreciate it. Once again, guys, I appreciate the support and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.